Hello and welcome back to the Life Runners podcast. I hope your year has started off well. I certainly have had a good couple of weeks. It's crazy to me that we're only in sort of the second full week of 2025, and there's already a lot of stuff going on in the watch world. I'm sure that you're seeing a lot of it on Instagram, both in the vintage and the modern world. So today we're going to cover a couple of events that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. And we will also go through some interesting watches that were released. Obviously, we're only 2 weeks into the year, so episode 2 of the 6th season of the Life Runners podcast is definitely continuing on a strong foot. So we'll start off with something maybe a little bit closer to the vintage world, but I think this kind of affects the entire watch market. When you're listening to this podcast, it will be over, but from January 9th to January 13th, there was the Miami Beach antique show where watch collectors and watch dealers got the opportunity to showcase a lot of their inventory, and it's a really nice gathering if you haven't had the opportunity to attend. And it's one of the highlights of the vintage watch world is definitely this show. I think it brings together a lot of different watchmakers, watch collectors, watch dealers, and it's a great opportunity for the industry to get together and, enjoy the things that we love. What was really cool this year is they had a couple of different events that took place. I'll go through them in a moment, but obviously there's going to be exhibitors who are going to be exhibiting some of the pieces they have in stock, and then there were these events that I think were really great. So on Friday, the January 10th was the first event, and that was what to look for when buying antique jewelry, and this was This was at 1 p.m. and the sort of script for it is that in this insightful session, author, jewelry historian, and founder of Gemalithos, Ionas Alexandris, will share tips for shopping for antique jewelry, from what to look for to what to avoid. Ionas will cover antique jewelry from 1800 to 1939. And so during that time, watches are obviously considered jewelry as well. There's some really nice watches that would fall into that time period that are quite exciting. And for me, that time period is at least, let's say, early 1900 to 1930s is a really interesting, 1940s is a really interesting time for vintage watches. We've had the opportunity to showcase a couple of pocket watches from around 1920, which is a very important time, I think, in the world of watches. So it was probably a very good session. There was also, on the same day, there was one that was Modern Eyes Classic Pieces, Wedgwood in the 21st Century. And this was, the blurb for this was, the under 50s are appreciating Wedgwood in a very different way than their parents. They're not collecting, but rather looking for functional and statement pieces. Stuart will delve into the new trends and what's hot and what's not. This is a specific type of decoration and furniture, and this was with Stuart Slavid, who was a senior vice president, director of European furniture, decorative arts, silvers, and fine ceramics at Bonhams. Same day, there was something a little bit closer to the watch world, and that was Timeless Traditions, the legacy and future of the Horological Society of New York. The Horological Society of New York is America's oldest watchmaking guild, founded in 1866. With the lecture Timeless Traditions, the legacy and future of the Horological Society of New York, Carolina Navarro will delve into the organization's rich history, mission, and contributions to the watchmaking community, and she is the deputy director. There was also, on the same day, the pitfalls of print collecting, terms to know before you go. I'll kind of skip that just because it doesn't really touch watches too much. On Saturday, what was really cool is Bonhams was obviously a very big part of this year's show. And they had a panel, and many of their speakers were on the, or many of their employees were speakers for some of the events, but they also offered complimentary appraisals where you could take your art, antiques, jewelry, watches, or accessories to their experts and have an appraisal of those pieces. It's a great opportunity for them as an auction house to get some pieces in for their catalogs. The same day at 2 o'clock, there was Timepiece Pursuits, the Thrills, Triumphs, and Tribulations of Watch Collecting. And the blurb is, in this vibrant panel discussion, attendees can hear from a panel featuring a celebrated timepiece influencer, an auction house watch specialist, and an avid collector, moderated by a watch journalist about the watches they traveled to find, the battles of auctions versus private dealers, how to feel confident about the authenticity of a timepiece, and the scope of the landscape, and more. And this panel was with Bryn Wallner of Dimepiece.co, Max Strauber from Bonhams, and John Reardon from Collectability, and it was moderated by Anthony Trena, who, it says Hodinkee, but he obviously is no longer with Hodinkee. He's doing his own thing. That one would have been a really great one to attend. And those are really the ones that sort of touch watchmaking. Obviously, there's one going on January the 12th, which is Tales from the Trade, and this kind of I think, an opportunity to share some of the tales of dealing at the Miami Beach Antique Show. So a really great event. Obviously, it's over by the time you're listening to this podcast, but if you do have the opportunity to go next year, or you're around that area for next year's original Miami Beach Antique Show, I encourage you to go. There'll be a link in the description to their website so you can stay up to date on that. Next up, I wanted to talk about a pretty big announcement that came out of Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer is returning as the official timekeeper of Formula One. Up until this point, between I think it was 2013 to 2024, Rolex was the official timekeeper of Formula One, but Tag Heuer has taken over and will be the official timekeeper going forward. And this marks a really great, I think, a really great event for the brand. They've done some really great things over the last couple of years, and their Formula One journey kind of started back in 1969, where they were worn by the racers of the racing of the people who were actually racing in Formula One, and they even had sponsored one of the teams in 1971. So they have a pretty storied history with Formula One. There's very famous pictures of Senna from McLaren wearing a Heuer, Niki Lauda looking and wearing various Heuers throughout his career. So it's a very important, I think, they're a very important brand to the Formula One racing, and a nice opportunity for them to extend this relationship and create more historical moments with this incredible sport. Tag Heuer has also been associated with, just to give you some of the numbers, they've been associated with 230 race victories, 595 podium finishes, and 11 World Constructors Championships and 14 World Driver Championships. So I'm sure that they're looking to extend this success that they have had in this, and have more individuals know about their brand and wear their watches. So it's definitely going to help. All right, moving on. This episode is moving on quite quickly here. We've got two stories that we wanted to cover about watches that had been released over the last, let's say, 2 weeks. The first one is a really cool watch that has been released by Oris. If you didn't know, Oris released a Pro Pilot that was known as the Kermit edition, where they actually had, I think, a date complication where you could see Kermit the Frog's face. And they've announced that they are releasing a Pro Pilot Miss Piggy edition. The watch has a really striking pink dial with pink baton hour markers. It's a time-only piece, so you've got a center seconds with an hours and minutes complication, a pink dial, pink applied hour markers, except for the hour marker at 12 o'clock, which is a lab-grown baguette-cut diamond, which is set at that 12 o'clock hour. And the pink really does stand out and is exactly what when you look at this dial, you would absolutely think of Miss Piggy. many people were wondering if there were going to be additions to this lineup of after the Kermit was released by Oris, and Oris really didn't speak too much about this, but a nice sort of follow-up to this. The watch is 34 millimeters in diameter, has a stainless steel case. If you don't know the Pro Pilot, it's a stainless steel case, 34 millimeters. It's got sort of matte and polished stainless steel finishing throughout the case as well as the bracelet. As I mentioned, hours, minutes, and seconds complication running on the Oris 531 automatic winding movement. Instead of having sort of a date complication like on the Kermit where you saw his name, this time they have, if you turn the watch over, there is a little window through the case back of the watch where one will see Miss Piggy's face on that through that sort of circle that they have put on the back of the on the case back. The Kermit was released actually at Watches and Wonders 2013, so it is a little bit of time since they released that and came out with this one, but it does seem like there is a willingness between Oris and Disney to continue to explore this collaboration that they have. Maybe we'll see other watches from this collaboration come out, but a cool piece, obviously sort of geared maybe a little bit more towards the women market, but it probably is fairly collectible if you are into these Pro Pilots. It's also relatively it's priced pretty well, to 2,800 Swiss francs. So, call it $3,000 I think, something thereabouts. A nice time-only piece. As always, there will be a link in the description, the show notes of this video, of this podcast, where you can go to a link. I'll link up the Revolution Watch post for you to go and check this out. All right, the last couple of watches that I wanted to discuss are from a brand called PS Horology. If you don't know, 8 years ago, Peter Speak, who was the founder of Speak Marin, a really well-known independent watch company, he stepped away from Speak Marin, and then what he ended up doing was releasing 2 new watches with this PS Horology brand. One is called the Tsuba Blue, and the other is called the Tsuba Dongson. And these first models are Japanese-inspired pieces with Japanese and Vietnamese. I guess the Tsuba Blue is Japanese-inspired, and then the Tsuba Dongson is Japanese-Vietnam-inspired. The watch takes its overall general form from the shaped guard at the end of a Japanese sword, which is the Tsuba, spelled Tsuba, and it basically protects the hand from slipping down the blade and adds sort of counterweight to these blades. And so what you end up having here is this sort of octagonal but curved case. It reminds me very much of sort of the case shape of a streamliner in it being sort of square but nicely rounded around the outsides of that sort of square shape. The watch is 38 millimeters in diameter and has a really striking look to it. I liken it very much to what a streamliner looks like in the case design as well as the bracelet. As I mentioned, there were sort of 2 watches, the Tsuba Blue, which features a sapphire dial center with an anodized metal frame floating above the dial, and then you have the Tsuba Dongson, which was a request from a Vietnamese retailer and features graphical concentric symbols in 18-karat gold with a slate or blue background, and it draws from the Dongson Bronze Age drums, paired with shaped hands bearing the forms of Dongson spears and daggers. And so this specific version of the watch, I think, is geared very much towards a specific type of buyer in a specific location or of specific background. And the symbols are basically of a 2,000-year-old Vietnamese culture, and I think that's very significant with the launch of this watch. It's definitely geared towards a specific type of buyer. Both watches are powered by the Voucher 5401 Ultratherm micro rotor movement with a 48-hour power reserve, and the Tsuba Blue comes on an integrated bracelet, whereas the Tsuba Dong comes on a strap. The Tsuba Blue is limited to 100 pieces, and then the Tsuba Dong Song will be made in 80 pieces. These pieces, as I mentioned, case-shaped very much like the Streamliner. Really interesting aesthetic when you look at the pieces front on. I think you have to be a very specific type of buyer. I'd say the Tsuba Blue is a little bit more reminiscent of what you saw at Speak Marin, where you have this really beautiful blue and white dial with these hour hands that are blued, and the hour's hand has this sort of circle in the center of the hour hand. It's really a nice watch to look at. And with the integrated bracelet, makes it a little bit more sporty. And then I think the Tsuba Dong Son is way more sort of artisanal and a little bit more classic, but a really beautiful piece. One of the things I love about it is sort of this sun. It has a subsidiary seconds dial at 6 o'clock, and it has this sort of golden sun that is basically on the inside of that sub-dial. Really, really beautiful to look at. I've been a fan of Speak Marin for a very long time. We've covered them on Life on the Wrist over the years, and I think Peter Speak does incredible watches that are worth looking at. I've said I want to be critical of the pieces that I cover on Life on the Wrist this year, not just speak about their benefits. I didn't actually say something about the Oris. We'll come back to that. But for these, I think you're looking at a very specific type of buyer, especially with the Dongson. It's sort of geographically, it has to be significant to the individual purchasing it. You have to have some sort of Japanese or Vietnamese background, or know of, or that culture being significant to you as an individual. I don't think it's really sort of a mass market watch. And for the Tsuba Blue, I think, to be honest, like there's a lot of watches that are looking like this nowadays. So one could criticize it for maybe its design not being super independent of the watches. As I mentioned, it looks very much like a Streamliner in its case construction as well as the bracelet. But it does kind of have a few features that are make it individualistic. For example, on the corners of the watch, instead of it being there's these little indents almost on the corners of the watch, which is a little bit different than some of the other pieces that you see out there. A really nice watch. I'll leave a link in the show notes for you to take a look at the article. Just to circle back to the Oris, I'd say the pink is you have to when it comes to criticizing the Oris, I'd say you have to want something with a pink dial. I also think the lab-grown baguette diamond almost feels somewhat out of place. Like you have this pink dial, pink hour markers, and then you have this random 12 o'clock baguette. Does it throw me off? Kind of. You'd imagine maybe you'd have one at 12, 3, 6, and 9. I'm sure they experimented with these things, but it kind of throws off the dial as sort of this random baguette that's placed. That's maybe where it would be criticized. But as always, I try to say good things and bad things about all these pieces this year, and hopefully you find that helpful. All right, I think that will wrap up the second episode of the Life Nurse podcast for 2026. As always, there will be links in the show notes of this podcast if you want to check out any of the articles or check out the websites of the things that we have discussed. Be sure to go down there. Let me know what you think about this podcast. I would love it if you wouldn't mind rating this podcast. Your feedback is really helpful for me. If you don't feel like rating us, send us a message on our website or on our social medias. It really does help me out. Speaking of that, if you want to check out more from Life on the Wrist, there'll be links to our website, YouTube channel, and our other social medias in the show notes for you to see that as well. If you are new to the Life from the Wrist podcast, be sure to follow us and share this podcast with a friend who might be interested in watches. It really does help this channel grow, and we look forward to meeting all the people who enjoy watches and enjoy listening to this podcast. So if you wouldn't mind liking this podcast, it really does help me out as well. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.